On the horizon, a haze of dust wafted smoothly over the sun-scorched earth, like the breath of the desert itself. It seemed alive, barely perceptible, but it crept inexorably over the stony hills, transforming the landscape into a shaky, almost mirage-like picture. The hot breath of the wind playfully drove dry leaves from one rock to another, their rustling sounding almost like the whispers of ancient spirits, the secret guardians of this land. Rare cacti, dried and prickly, like mute guardians, towered over the emptiness, guardians of the memory of centuries past here, in this god-forsaken place where every stone remembered the footsteps of the ancestors. This was the Wild West, a ruthless land where the boundaries between truth and falsehood dissolved into dust, and blood became the only sure payment for love and duty. Here every movement, every whisper of wind, every crack of a broken twig was a sign of fate that could not be ignored, just as one could not turn away from one's own reflection in the blazing sunset. From the depths of the valley, through the deafening silence and stillness, a rhythm began to emerge. The heavy, monotonous beats of the drums, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, penetrated every bone, making not only the body, but also the soul vibrate. Their sound revealed ancient memories, awakened forgotten ancestors, and came wave after wave, like an impending storm ready to shake the very fabric of the world. In the flames of the fire, dancing among the rocks and casting rippling shadows, he appeared, a tall, strong man with long black hair that waved in the wind. His muscular chest was bare, covered in tattoos, patterns that bore symbols of strength, wisdom, and blood left by his ancestors. Every feature of his face was carved by harsh trials, the weight of responsibility, and the deep knowledge that on his shoulders lay the defense not only of people, but of history, of memory, of the very spirit of the land. In his hand gleamed a sharp knife, cold and fierce in the firelight. He stood motionless, like a stone statue, the embodiment of strength and determination, the embodiment of one who would not back down despite fear and pain. The dancers were circling around, their faces smoky with smoke, their eyes burning with inner fire, and the whole space seemed to freeze, waiting for the fateful moment. At that moment, the man slowly and decisively made a cut on his palm. Drops of bright red blood, hot and alive, ran down his skin, falling to the dry, cracked earth. They soaked into her as if they were making an ancient, unbreakable pact, a sign of strength and loyalty. His lips quietly whispered sacred words in the language of the ancestors, words of oath and invocation that only those who listen with their hearts can understand. Behind him, like invisible witnesses, the silhouettes of spirits loomed in the smoke of the fire, elusive and mysterious, their gazes stern but full of wisdom and understanding. Something more than a fire surrounded the place. Nature herself held her breath, watching the sacred ritual. A little to the side stood she, a woman whose countenance was illuminated by the soft light of the fire. Her eyes were wide open and full of terror, but at the same time they burned with unyielding determination. Anxiety lived inside her, a premonition that this night would change their lives forever. Her soul already knew that what was happening now would be the turning point of fate, the moment when everything would never be the same again. The world seemed to freeze, the air filled with tension and anticipation. A voiceover, as if from space itself, pierced the silence. He swore to protect his love with blood. But the truth she learned would destroy everything. And the moment stood still, as if time had stopped and the very earth itself was listening for the coming storm. This was only the beginning, a story rooted in the depths of time, when the line between good and evil was thin and shaky, when outsiders encroached on sacred lands and every step could be the beginning of war, when love could be a blessing but could also turn into a terrible curse. The earth remembered everything, every rustle, every whisper of the wind, every cry over the desert, every drop of spilled blood inscribed in the priceless book of fate that no storm can erase. The ancient whispers still resounded in the rocks, in the curves of the canyons, in the silence of the night, accessible only to those who could hear. Tension hung over the land as if nature itself held its breath, guarding secrets that made souls tremble. Those who dared to upset the ancient balance had to be prepared to pay a terrible price. The fire danced to the beat of the drums, casting long shadows over faces and bodies. The man knelt down, carefully joining his blood to the dusty earth as if making a pact with the very heart of the world. There was no fear in his eyes. Determination and acceptance of the inevitable burned there. The woman standing to the side sensed that this ritual would change everything, and not just for them. The truth, like a sharp knife, lurked in the shadows of the night. When it came out into the light, nothing would ever be the same again. Everything would begin anew with blood, with fire, with love, and curse woven into one unbreakable thread. Before everything was tangled in blood and secrets, the land still had a life of its own, slow, unhurried, but filled with meaning and a deep connection to the sky and the spirits. In wide, wind-swept canyons, where mighty cliffs blocked the sun's path like ancient giant walls, the Navajo lived in harmony with the world around them. Their days flowed like a quiet river, carrying with them labor, song, and prayer. Every step, every action was part of a ritual, a reminder that life is a circle where everything is interconnected and everyone has a role to play. Tohani, the young chief, stood out not for his age, but for a depth of spirit and wisdom that was unrivaled in his tribe. His face, stern but noble, bore the mark of many trials. His eyes reflected the ancient memory of which he was the guardian. He walked among his people with a quiet confidence, as if he knew not only the past, but also what was to come. His turquoise jewelry and fine leather garments were more than objects. They told stories, woven into every bead and string, stories that only the initiated understood. Tohani left the tepee at dawn, greeting the new day as one would greet an old friend, with respect and hope. His gaze traveled far beyond the desert horizons, where invisible wind currents whispered secrets that only he could hear. People turned to him not only for advice and protection, but also for the strength that came from his understanding of the world. But beyond this sacred world, an alien force was approaching. The railroad cutting across the vast plains brought with it noise and bustle, unfamiliar faces and cruel ambition. Caravans with rumbling wheels and screaming gold diggers swept away everything in their path, destroying the fragile order and bringing with them fear and ruin. Into this new and dangerous world came Sarah Winslow, the daughter of a senator, brought up in the luxury and austerity of Eastern salons, where life was scheduled by hours and rules. Her existence seemed predetermined: marriage, social receptions, endless conversations about money and status. But fate had other plans. Her journey across the desert became a test. A sandstorm and a sudden attack of brigands brought an avalanche of fear and loneliness upon her. Waking up surrounded by strangers speaking an unfamiliar language was like falling into another world. But in those eyes, in their gazes, she saw not savage cruelty, but a quiet, unwavering strength and honesty she had not known before. Fear slowly receded, giving way to a new feeling of connection with the land and people who seemed part of nature itself. Sarah was learning to listen with her heart, not with words, to breathe in the sound of the wind, to feel the warmth of the fire, to recognize the care in simple gestures. There was a bond between her and Tohani, as fragile as a crack in glass, but as strong as ancient stone. It wasn't built on words or touch. It was silence, understanding, and presence. He watched her from afar, holding himself back, and she accepted his distance with quiet respect. There was a sadness lurking in Tohani's eyes, a deep and inexplicable sadness that only drew Sarah in even more. Their relationship was a dance, subtle and careful, in which every step was filled with significance and caution. The elders were silent, but their eyes spoke volumes. Everyone realized that a bond was growing between the white woman and the chief, a bond that was dangerous and unusual for this time and place. Under other conditions it would have been impossible, but now everything was changing. Anxiety was growing not only inside the camp, but all around. White settlers were demanding more and more land. Military patrols were tightening their control, as if slowly tightening a ring around the tribe. Rumors of approaching trouble and restless spirits sharpened their senses. The people knew it was time to turn to the ancient powers. Centuries. The conspiracies surrounding the ritual were gaining strength. This ancient ritual, almost forgotten, was bloody and terrible, but it promised protection, albeit at the cost of hardship. It was a challenge to a fate that could either save the tribe or destroy everything they had kept for centuries. The preparations for the ritual were imbued with a special atmosphere. The women of the tribe gathered and dried sacred herbs, sage, wormwood, cedar branches, to cleanse the ceremony site. Their hands moved deftly and confidently, as if the plants themselves responded to their touch, giving their strength and protection. The teepees were filled with scents that seemed to speak to the spirits of the ancestors. Young warriors practiced ritual dances and songs, trying to put their devotion and determination into every step and sound. A huge bonfire in the center of the camp was preparing to receive the flames that would become a symbol of purification and transition. Inside Tohani, a struggle between duty and feeling was simmering. He realized that the ritual was his last chance to save the tribe from destruction, but he also feared that he would lose himself and those he loved. Sarah saw the struggle in his eyes and felt the weight of the decision hanging over them both. Her heart clenched at the realization that their bond, so tender and rare, might be sacrificed on the altar of ancient traditions and harsh circumstances. The evening before the ritual came. The camp was silent, interrupted only by the rustle of the wind and the crackle of the cooking fire. Tohani walked to the top of the hill that overlooked the entire valley. He raised his hands to the stars, asking his ancestors for strength and wisdom. A storm raged in his soul, but there was a calm determination on his face. Sarah came to him, and they stood silently side by side, sharing this moment, realizing that tomorrow a new chapter would begin, for them, for the tribe, and for all the land that held them on its ancient shoulders. Every day Sarah felt more and more like a prisoner of two worlds, like a wanderer stuck on the edge of an invisible abyss that separated her past from her present. The white world where she had been born and raised, with its impeccable manners, carefully chosen words, and strained smiles, was gradually receding into a cold, alien space. It became more and more distant, like a landscape seen through a cloudy glass that cannot be touched. But even here, among the stony hills and the vast expanse of desert, Sarah's soul found no peace, like a captive bird in a cage that sees neither light nor shadow. Once she had felt the warmth of nature here, the coziness of a night fire, and the quiet whisper of the wind. Now it all turned to mystery and fear. Every touch of the wind seemed cold and prickling, every crackle of twigs in the night a harbinger of unseen threat. The glances cast in her direction were short, but sharp as the point of an arrow, full of hidden knowledge that made the heart hammer in the chest. The women, once friendly and affectionate, now averted their eyes coldly, stopped inviting her to the fire, hiding their attitude behind polite silence. Even the children, whose ringing voices used to fill the air with joy, avoided her, looking warily from behind the backs of the adults. The old men, the guardians of the tribe's age-old wisdom, turned their backs and walked away silently when she tried to speak of the things that troubled her and burned inside her. It was as if the tribe had closed around her with an invisible wall, separating her from the living souls, leaving her alone with her thoughts and fears. And then Sarah began to realize that something terrible and deep had happened, something that was not openly spoken about. Something was enveloping Tohani. His inner light that had once warmed her was now dimmed and eclipsed by something incomprehensible. It was different, cold, silent, almost imperceptible, like the darkness of night before a storm approached. His wigwam, once a place of strength and light, now seemed empty and gloomy. The air around him seemed to be soaked with a heavy silence, and the animals sensed the change. The dogs, usually boisterous and playful, howled with piercing longing as they passed his dwelling. The birds, which usually greeted the dawn with trills, were silent, as if afraid to disturb the peace, which was becoming more and more tense. In the eyes of the oldest and wisest, who had survived dozens of winters, there was a deep fear, not fear of the enemy, but of something beyond their comprehension. One day, when Tahani was away, Sarah ventured into his wigwam. There, among the shadows and semi-darkness, she found objects that could make her heart shake with fear and wonder. A rosary made of coyote teeth, a dry snake's tail, a small bag of dark earth and hair that seemed alien. It was all imbued with an ancient power that defied explanation. Sarah realized these weren't just things. They were symbols and signs, messages from the depths of time, evidence of the summoning of a powerful and unpredictable force. She guessed it. The Tohani had summoned something ancient and powerful, or perhaps it was not he who had summoned, but the summons that had come to him. Sarah didn't sleep a wink that night. Thoughts and fears swarmed through her mind like a darkness that was growing thicker and thicker. She walked to the place where she had first seen the ritual circle, but now everything was different. The circle was shattered, the ground covered in deep cracks, as if it was tearing itself apart from the inside out. The sand, once soaked in blood, had dried and faded, but there were new mysterious symbols scorched in charcoal, strange patterns that had nothing human about them. No child of the tribe could reproduce these broken lines and intertwining patterns. They were signs from another time, another world, from the depths of ancient legends and myths. At that moment, a terrible realization came to Sarah. The ritual had worked. The power summoned by the Tohani had indeed come here. But it was not a force of light or goodness. It did not care who it protected or who it destroyed. It came with a demand, and its price was high. The tribe began to suffer. Cattle died for no reason. Sickness swept over the people. One by one they disappeared into the forests and never returned. They said they heard strange sounds, as if bones were whispering, as if the voices of long-gone ancestors could not find peace. Some saw eyes glowing in the darkness that followed them, step by step, but never came closer. That cold, unknown fear permeated the air, and no one knew how to banish it. Sarah could feel the darkness slowly closing in on everything. Her heart clenched with fear, but deep inside she felt determination. She knew that if she didn't intervene, the power would consume not only the Tohani, but everyone around them. She was determined to go all the way, to find the origins of the ritual, to understand the mysteries of the night when the chieftain's blood spilled on the ground and caused the unpredictable. The answers could lurk in the old legends, in the songs whispered around the fire, in the stones and shadows that now never left these lands. But time was slipping away, and Sarah knew she was not alone in this quest for truth. The spirits with whom the blood pact had been made were watching her too, their gazes filled with expectation and silent demand. Meeting them was inevitable. Sarah walked on, but the sand beneath her feet did not diminish, as if the earth itself were trying to hold her, not to let her go. The sand wasn't just hot and loose, it felt alive, clinging tightly to her feet, penetrating between her toes, each step resisting her. Sometimes it felt as if her feet were sinking not just into the sand, but into something viscous and dark that drew her deeper and deeper, as if trying to stop her escape. Her whole gait became like a struggle, a slow melting away of strength and hope. Her body slowly began to change. Her heart was beating hard and muffled inside, and then it sped up, clutching her chest in a tight vice. His breathing became intermittent and heavy, his lungs filled with a viscous air full of dust and desert dryness that burned his throat and made him cough. Each inhalation felt like a small victory, and each exhalation a loss of strength and will. Sarah could feel the tension gradually building in every muscle, neck, shoulders, arms. Everything was gripped by a painful tension, as if the body was preparing for an inevitable battle with itself and the world around it. Her skin burned from the scorching sun, but inside, a chill of anxiety snaked up to her bones. Her palms were damp with sweat, her fingers clenched into fists as if searching for a foothold in this shaky world. The emptiness in her chest was growing, slowly but inexorably, pushing the calm and certainty out of her. She could feel the emptiness filling every corner of her being, displacing breath, hope, even the vaguest of ghostly desires. Fear, subtle, prickling and cold, intertwined with longing and bitterness. Sarah couldn't tell if it came from her own helplessness, from fate's betrayal, or from something far more ancient than she could realize. Images of Tohani constantly haunted her. He seemed to come alive inside her, his quiet, deep gaze burning in her memory like a bright fire against the gloom. That gaze was still and calm, but there was an abyss in it, a bottomless depth beyond the comprehension of mere mortals. It was both suffering and strength, passion and steadfastness, born of an inner fire that burned stronger than all the storms and cold of the world. She remembered how he had been silent when fear gripped her heart, not trying to calm or stop her, not coaxing or holding her back, just being there, like the earth and sky themselves, eternal, mute and unchanging. The silence seemed both a blessing and a curse, for it offered neither comfort nor hope. But the act he had performed, the blood ritual, remained incomprehensible to her. It was not just a symbolic gesture, but an ancient and terrible alliance with a power that was neither good nor evil. She felt its heavy weight, the unbearable price that this gift carried with it, a price from which there was no escape. The understanding of this ritual did not come immediately. It pressed on her, squeezing her heart and mind, making her shiver and fear. It was a step beyond humanity, a step that could destroy or save, but there was no choice left. On the third day of the journey, a patrol appeared. Soldiers, haggard and dusty, with carts and tired horses. They were foreign and familiar at the same time, men from a world Sarah had once known, but which now seemed alien and distant. Their looks were wary, their words formal and cold. Sarah introduced herself, a senator's daughter, lost among the wild lands, and it caused them to look at her with surprise mixed with suspicion. The officer gently covered her with his cloak, offered her water, a place in the wagon. His words sounded like a memorized prayer, loud and solemn, but empty, devoid of genuine warmth. For Sarah, this was not an escape, more like a new cage, a new form of confinement. Her body trembled with fatigue, with an unfamiliar sense of softness and security that was both frightening and longing. In the garrison's wooden tent, filled with the odors of sweat, dust, and ink, she looked at herself in the mirror for the first time. Her reflection was alien, a tired, tanned, and haggard face, tangled hair and dirt on her skin. But the worst of it was that the eyes didn't have the same fires of fear or anger in them, but a deep, dark longing, a longing for something that words couldn't explain. It was a longing for himself, for a lost world, for a forgotten home. People around her showed kindness and care. Officers asked questions, doctors checked her pulse and blood pressure, tried to understand how to help her, but no one could understand her. The young lieutenant made timid attempts to talk and even flirt, but there was a cold transparency in his every glance, as if he were looking at her through glass, separated from her pain and mystery. One night, as the tent fell into a deep sleep, Sarah quietly stepped outside. The cold night air burned her skin, making her shudder, but she lifted her face to the starry sky and burst into tears. The tears rolled down her face, not from pain or fear, but from emptiness, from the realization of loss, the loss of that Sarah Winslow of New York, who was now forever in the shadows. She was connected to something ancient and inexplicable, a bond that could not be broken or forgotten. Far from civilization, Tohani stood at the huge rock, the place where he had performed the ritual, where his blood had fused with the earth. The wind rustled softly in the grass, and the night sky was full of silent stars. He felt it. She was alive, but her heart was far away from here. He didn't curse her, he didn't cry out or pray. He just waited, waiting for the hour when the earth would speak again. And it would, because love, bound by blood and spirit, does not die. It only goes into the shadows to come back and speak again. Fort Lyons stood like a black rock on the edge of the lifeless desert, tearing the horizon with its stark power. Its high log walls, dark with soot and time, seemed an impenetrable fortress, separating this world from all living and breathing things. Every inch of wood held the memory of long winters, hot summers, and the endless torment of those who had once tried to survive here. The wind, shrill and dry, swept across the fort's grounds, making the wooden floors and heavy doors creak and groan. The sound, like an echo of oblivion, accompanied each step, echoing with a thud in his heart. The air smelled of dust, tar, and musty corners where years had gathered dust and darkness. Sarah paced under the soldier's guard, feeling the creaking boards beneath her feet and feeling the walls squeeze her in a vice. There was no joy or light in this place, only a strict order where every minute and every movement was controlled. Barracks for high-ranking civilians was a euphemism to hide loneliness and helplessness. Her situation opened doors but brought no relief. The name of the senator's daughter was only an empty shell behind which lurked a cold and soulless cage. The room where she'd been placed was small and dimly lit, with a thick layer of dust on the shelves and a window covered with rusty metal bars. The walls seemed lifeless, as if covered in a layer of oblivion. There was no room for hope here, only waiting and an oppressive silence, heavy as a stone on her chest. Sarah stood at the window, looking out over the desert, where the sand was always rippling in the breeze, hiding forgotten footprints. Dawn glimmered in the distance, and in this first moment of freedom trapped between walls, her heart pounded with hope and fear at the same time. Something inside was tearing at her, the desire to leave, to forget, to find a new path, but also the weight of loss that was not commonly spoken of. Here, in the silence and cold, she felt for the first time how far she had drifted from the world that had once seemed dear to her. And it was this distance, this abyss between her and her former self, that created an unbearable emptiness that grew in her chest and choked every breath. In this dead space, where past and present merged into one endless waiting, Sarah realized that freedom comes in many forms, and its price is often higher than one can bear. The desert outside the window continued its eternal dance with the wind, and she remained trapped between those wooden walls, between what she was and what she must become. Edgar Winslow entered the room like a shadow of the past, heavy and motionless. His face, stern and chiseled by years of fighting for status and power, hid a multitude of unspoken thoughts. His eyes, cold as blue ice, glided across the room without a shadow of warmth, reflecting more fear of himself and his circumstances than tenderness for his daughter. His movements were precise and restrained, every raise of the eyebrow, every barely perceptible compression of the lips, as if controlled by an iron will forged in endless compromises and rigid decisions. His voice, when he spoke, was flat and dry, without a hint of affection or regret, as if the words measured the weight of responsibility rather than emotion. The conversation between them flowed quietly but tensely, like an icy river under a layer of brittle ice. The words, devoid of warmth, touched on duty, honor, and the need to keep the family name alive as if it were the last stronghold in a raging world. Each of them tried to keep their distance, Sarah between hope and despair, Edgar between power and fear of losing control. A conflict was brewing inside Sarah, her love for her father and the realization of the coldness that was tearing her world apart. She sought understanding, the slightest sign of support, but was met only with detachment, as if a wall of silence and unrealized expectations had grown between them. Her father's motives were clear and unchanging: family honor, power over the situation, and fear of losing control. His world was built on rigid rules, where weakness was unacceptable and any expression of human vulnerability was a threat. To him, Sarah was not just a daughter, but part of a great game in which every move had to be calculated. Their meeting was not a union, but a collision of worlds. a world where feelings seemed superfluous, and a world that Sarah was trying to find within herself no matter what. In this room, the cold was a thick blanket, and the only warmth was the unquenchable flame of determination that grew in her heart. Returning to civilization was like being immersed in an alien world where everything was carefully constructed and rehearsed down to the smallest detail. Formal living rooms with shiny china sets, impeccably arranged furniture and drawn curtains seemed like the set of a long-forgotten play. The corsets that restrained breath and movement were a reminder of the invisible fetters that every woman here was bound by, ways dictated not by desire but by duty. In this world, smiles were masks and conversations were carefully calibrated rituals. People surrounded her, but everyone was like a prisoner of his own image, inside of which there was emptiness and fear of showing real feelings. Sarah felt like a stranger among these cardboard figures, whose lives were lived under constant surveillance and judgment. There was no room for freedom here, only rules that stifled and hid the truth. In moments of solitude, her memory brought back Tohani's voice, deep and calm as a mountain lake, capable of comfort and reassurance. His gaze, not just staring, but penetrating to the very depths of her soul with a warmth and strength that knew no words. It was like a silent flame burning in her chest, reminding her that something real and eternal existed beyond the walls of the porcelain world. His presence, despite the distance and silence, remained a support, a light among the shadows. Remembering him, Sarah realized that this world, as beautiful and perfect as it seemed, would never be her home. Here was only a shadow of her former life, cold, empty, and far from the strength and truth she felt around him. Night had fallen upon the fort, lulling its walls into soft darkness, but an unsettling silence remained in the corridors, filled with hidden voices and footsteps. Sarah, driven by some vague inner impulse, hid in the shadows, barely breathing, trying not to give away her presence. Every sound echoed in her chest, the creak of boards under her boots, the muffled whispers, the indifferent words like knives piercing the air. The officers spoke coldly, ruthlessly, as if discussing just another item on a to-do list. Their words, a plan, an order, a sentence, sounded like a sentence to those who listened and to those they were talking about. Sarah felt the blood pounding louder and louder in her temples, her breath hitching, her heart clenching like a trap. Fear crawled under her skin, splitting her thoughts and stiffening her movements. Later, in the library, among the endless racks of dusty books and yellowed pages, Sarah found refuge from her anxiety. The air here was thick with the smell of old paper, tar, and abandoned mysteries. In the silence of this place, she flipped through documents and reports, gradually revealing to herself the true extent of the betrayal. Each line became a heavy weight from which it was impossible to look away. The mystery came true, and the anxiety became an unbearable weight that penetrated her body to the very bones. She knew there was no turning back now. The letter lay on the table in front of her, the pale pages seeming cold and emotionless. Sarah reread each word, trying to find another meaning, another signature, another glimmer of hope. But the lines were ruthless and clear, an order given by her father, a sentence written in the ink of power and betrayal. Shock slowly filled her entire consciousness, stretching through her body, making every movement heavy and clumsy. There was a gaping chasm inside that no exculpatory story could fill. The betrayal of her father, the one who had once taught her honesty and justice, burned hot, scorching her heart and mind. Memories of his stern lessons, of how he had instilled in her the values of duty and honor, collided with bitter reality, shattering everything she believed in. Tahani's shadow appeared before her eyes, his silence that now seemed not indifference but protection. He was keeping the truth, hiding it to keep it from hurting her. A new resolve grew inside Sarah, not to break down and give in to despair, but to accept the weight of knowledge and move on, to regain her lost dignity and light. The night stretched on endlessly, as if the darkness itself wove a web of thoughts and anxieties in her mind. Every memory, every fear came back with a redoubled force, making her heart beat faster and her breath hitch. But along with it came determination, a quiet fire that kept her from succumbing to hopelessness. Dawn was slowly breaking outside the windows, and the first rays of the sun were gliding across the deserted expanse, promising a new day and new hope. It was like a sign that called her to go, a sign that could not be delayed. As she packed, Sarah chose simple clothes, a light dress, free of pomp and corsets, as a symbol of renunciation of her former life. The letter that brought the bitter truth she hid deep in the folds of the dress as a secret that no one should see. Her soul was silently saying goodbye to the past, to all the illusions, fears, and hopes that were bound up with her father's name and the hard walls of the fort. As she left the room, she paused for a moment, listening to the sound of the door closing. It sounded like the end of an old chapter. A light breeze touched her face, bringing the scent of freedom and uncharted roads. Sarah took the first step into a world where she wrote her own rules. The morning came quietly and gently, like a gentle whisper in the desert canyons. The fog still lingered on the ground, gently hiding the traces of the night's battle, and the air was filled with the bitter tones of blood, smoke, and burnt grass. Amidst this mixture of odors was the fresh scent of pine resin, a symbol of life and hope that cut through the bitterness of the morning. Sarah sat by the flickering fire, clutching Toani's cold hand in hers. His pale face reflected weariness and pain, his breathing rare and intermittent, like a candle flame wavering in the wind. In that silence lay their entire story, a bond at once fragile and strong that now filled her heart. Around the fire, the camp lived its quiet life. The women, moving carefully, carried the wounded into the shade of the teepees, covering them with soft blankets and treating them with herbs known to the tribe's healers. The men, though tired, carefully inspected their bows and spears, preparing them for the day ahead as if preparing for a new battle. The elders stood in a circle, nodding discreetly, expressing sorrow for their losses, but maintaining unwavering resolve. The young warriors helped each other to stand up. Some were crying silently, and some were silently calling out to the spirits of the earth, asking them for strength and patience. There was no fear in their gazes, only resilience born of the depths of struggle and faith in the future. Tohani slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was deep and calm, and there was a quiet fire in it, a reflection of the pain and yet hope with which they continued on their journey. Sarah, sitting beside him, felt an invisible thread between them, strong and unbreakable. Over the next few days, the camp gradually came back to life. The women wove new nets to catch fish. The children, tired and frightened, slowly returned to laughter and play, and the men made their rounds around the camp, watching the horizon carefully, as if anticipating the trials to come. Sarah stayed close to Toani, helping him and learning to listen to the world around her, the language of the wind, the sounds of silence, and the subtle movements of nature. She began to see every blade of grass, every bird, and every sound as part of the whole, the new world that was now her home. A new feeling grew inside her, not just a desire to survive, but a desire to be a link between the tribe and those who had yet to understand the depths of this land. Her fears and doubts did not disappear, but softened, giving way to an inner strength and firm resolve. She realized that the past could not be rejected, but that to let it dictate the future was to remain a prisoner. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight painted the canyons golden, Sarah and the Toani made their way to the sacred site where the blood ritual took place. The ground beneath their feet was moist, the air fresh and full of life. An ancient power was felt here, the memory of the ancestors who watched over them. This place became a symbol of a new beginning, where fates intertwined and hearts found peace and meaning. At that moment, Sarah felt something ancient and eternal enter her soul, filling her with strength and determination to go forward, along with the tribe, with new life and new hope. The evening silence of the camp enveloped everything around her like a soft blanket, muffling the sounds and taking her thoughts to the depths. Sarah sat by the fire, holding Tohani's hand gently in her palm, weak and cold, but surprisingly alive. His face was pale, like porcelain, where time had left its marks of fatigue and pain. His eyes were half closed, and his breathing was rare and intermittent, reminiscent of the quiet flickering of a candle in the wind. Every weak movement of Tohani spoke of frailty, but in that frail body lived an unchanging strength, a strength of spirit and will that bound him to Sarah by an invisible but unbreakable thread. In the silence between them there was more than care. It was a deep bond born of adversity and a shared desire for life. Sarah could feel her heart beating in unison with his rare breathing, how each breath of To'ani filled her own body with strength and hope. There was a magnitude in his weakness, and in his calmness a promise of a future they were both willing to fight for. The camp fell into a quiet but tense bustle, where every movement was filled with care and fatigue. The women carefully carried the wounded into the shade of the teepees, covering them with soft blankets and applying herbs, the knowledge of generations woven into every touch. Their hands worked gently, as if trying to heal not only the wounds of the body, but also the soul. The men, despite their exhaustion, carefully inspected and repaired their bows and spears, as if by this gesture they were restoring not only their weapons, but also their strength and resolve. There was no fear in their gazes, only a steadfastness born of years of struggle and a quiet promise to protect what was dear. In the center of the camp, the elders gathered in a circle, their faces restrained, but in every look they could see the bitterness of loss and the wisdom of centuries. They silently supported each other, united by a common challenge, ready to lead the tribe through the darkness to the light of a new day. Sarah felt something new and profound awaken inside her, a sense of belonging that had seemed unattainable until then. For the first time, she truly felt part of something bigger than just a human being within foreign walls. The tribe around her, their customs, their quiet strength and respect for the land and the spirits, all of it added up to an invisible but strong network of support and understanding. Sarah's inner world was filled with the realization of her connection to her ancestors, to the spirits that lived in every tree, every stone, and every breath of wind. This unity became a new anchor for her, a support that helped her calm her fear and confusion.